Welcome to the 7th interview of Season 4 of the Perfect Par podcast. This time I am joined by speed and biomechanics expert, Dr. Sasho MacKenzie. Sasho received his Ph.D. in kinesiology from the University of Saskatchewan and is currently a professor at St. Francis Xavier University in Canada. Sasho has published many studies on the golf swing and equipment, but he is most well known to the common golfer as the co-founder of the Stack System. The Stack System is a revolutionary overspeed training system used by many of the world's best players. I personally have used the Stack for a few months now and have seen tremendous results. You can find out more about the system at thestacksystem.com. If you listened to my previous interview with Scott Fawcett, you know how important speed is. And in this interview, Sasho is going to talk about how to improve it. Let's dive in. Well, Sasho, I think I first want to start by asking, how did you find yourself working in golf biomechanics?
Well, I guess I found myself here from my PhD in golf biomechanics. I guess that's I did an undergrad in kinesiology, took a lot of electives in engineering and math, computer science, and always interested in sports. I was an athlete at university myself. And liked academics, liked the idea of being a prof, acquisition of knowledge, teaching other people, but also wanted to be part of something in an industry potentially, so not just necessarily stuck as a professor. Not that that's somewhere you'd have to consider being stuck.
Right.
But yeah, so did my PhD thesis on customizing shaft stiffness to a golfer's swing. That kind of got me into the field, I guess.
Yeah. Have you always played golf, or is golf something you found kind of when you were doing your research?
Yeah, I've always played golf. It was certainly as a kid growing up in Prince Edward Island, Canada, it was more of a hobby than something that I took really seriously. But I did a lot, spent a lot of time fishing, spent a lot of time golfing. But took other sports kind of more seriously in terms of a competitive nature. But I was the type of kid that was dropped off the golf course in the morning, picked up at night. Yeah. And then it became I think as I went to university, I did track and field and volleyball at university. Then that became a competitive outlet for me. So then I started taking more seriously for my own game in my early 20s. And, so that was kind of like something I would try to maximize my performance in and try to maximize the performance of others. I spent a lot of time coaching other sports throughout my life. And now I've kind of focused a little bit more in golf.
Yeah. So I first want to talk about your Stack System. That's personally how I found out about you. I am on my last session of the foundations, which I'll do later today. I've seen great success with it. But I want to understand a little bit more about how it works physiologically. How does it actually increase your speed through motor patterns and whatever it does?
Yeah. Okay. Well, the basic, there's a couple of avenues that it can have an influence.
Okay.
I've got a model in my head of a deterministic model of things you can do to increase your club head speed. So you mentioned physiologically, so the way our bodies work is they adapt to stimulus. So if we provide a stimulus that exceeds what we're currently experiencing, then our body says, hey, that's new. We might have to do that again. Let's adapt. So that's kind of the fundamental level of the physiology. So if you're swinging, most golfers don't swing at their maximum level of effort. So this is kind of like the biggest mechanism. So even though like a tour player might say, well, I hit 200 drivers a week. How is, adding a few more swings with the Stack System going to help? Well, you're swinging your driver probably at 95%. If you take an elite sprinter, 100-meter sprinter, and you said, right, you're going to do all your reps at 95%, they won't get any faster. If you took the average person walking around the street and you had them sprint at 95%, they would get faster for a little while, but then they would quickly plateau. So that's an easy way to access extra speed is just swing faster. right? So you can,
Wow. Yeah.
and in the research studies that I've done, I would always have a control group that just used their driver and swung it harder.
Hmm.
And they would get faster, but you plateau quicker and you plateau at lower speeds than if you do stack training.
Hmm.
So another way to tap into that stimulus is to have golfers, even though they're swinging at a maximum level of effort, if you lighten the resistance, then you get overspeed training. So for that same level of effort, your body has to move faster.
Hmm.
Well, that's a stimulus. So your brain has to send signals to your muscles faster. The machinery in your muscles have to contract faster in order to keep up with the system. And there's an adaptation that occurs with that. And then we also have overload. So we can load the stack so that the forces that you apply in moving it, even though it's still a maximum effort, will be higher than with your own driver. And
Hmm.
that creates its own set of stimuli that your body adapts to. And that, compared to just swinging your driver with more effort, that will also see adaptation. So you tend to peak later, plateau later, and you plateau at higher speeds than if you just practice max effort swings. But then, those types of adaptations can and will go away over time if you stop training.
Hmm.
So there's a whole other set of of ways that you can get faster based on your swing mechanics. So we have this radar that needs to be used for the stack system, some kind of speed training device, so you can see, hey, I swung this way, and that was the speed. Well, what if I decided to lift my lead heel? What if I had a better transition? So a lot of golfers will see improvements in their swing mechanics.
Mm.
And I encourage people to have swing thoughts when they train with the stack. And hopefully those swing thoughts can also transfer to the driver, as long as they're things that are related to speed.
Right.
Using the ground better, organizing your body segments better, and then you learn better mechanics. Because you get to do all these reps without worrying about the negative feedback of hitting a ball. Still
Right.
need to hit balls at some point to make sure the speed transfers. But those are the gains that are made from changes in your mechanics can last long after you stop stacking. Eventually, they might go away, but so you've got the physiological gains, and then you have the kind of coordination gains, you call them, or changes to your swing mechanics. And then there's a lot of folks that don't realize how hard they can swing.
Yeah.
They're perpetually going around. They think they're swinging, at near maximum effort, or even that you might say, well, I'm swinging at 95%. Really, they're swinging at 80%. They're
Right.
just not putting enough effort into trying to displace the golf ball as far down the fairway as they can. So there's certainly a lot of individuals that, a light bulb goes off and go, okay, this is what it means to actually try to hit a golf ball far.
Yeah. Do you think the natural changes in the mechanics when people are trying to swing faster are always positive to also their overall golf swing?
They should be. That's a great question, and there are lots of people who say, "Well, so and so did speed training and they got worse." And I'll have people will reach out and say, "Hey, I worked really hard to get my lead wrist into flexion at the top of the swing, and now that I've been stack training, I'm now getting into extension." And I'll say, "Well, don't do that." Like
Yeah.
you can then be conscious if you think that it is negatively impacting your mechanics, then there's no reason why you can't speed train while consciously working on those things. There's no reason why you can't swing as fast as you can, lift
Yeah.
your lead heel, but focus on keeping your lead wrist in flexion if that's what you want to do.
Right.
And in this lab behind me is where a lot of the initial speeds training stuff was done. So we would have a lot of folks come in that were slicers. And I
Hmm.
used the Flight Scope at the time, Flight Scope X2, and it would show your club head speed with a dry swing, but also show your horizontal swing plane.
Uh-huh.
So these golfers are coming in. My students would be in here tracking them and providing motivational feedback, making sure the weights they were loading on were correct. And I'd come in, I'd say, "Hey, look, I might know them, from the golf course, know they slice, or I could see they slice." And I'll say, "Hey, while you're
Hmm.
trying to swing as fast as you can, we've got an exit to the door that's over there to the right." And I would say, "Hey, swing that club head out the door," you know.
Yeah.
So now they're getting all these reps. They're still doing all the stuff they needed to swing fast and have adaptations, but now they're changing their swing direction. And a lot of these golfers now to this day still hit draws. They went from being slicers to
Wow.
now hitting draws off the tee. And so, there's no reason why you can't think of speed training with the stack as ways to get in repetitions that will improve your swing. Certainly, if you decide to make swings that are not good golf swings, then there probably could be some transfer, but there doesn't have to be any negative transfer. And that's a very direct way to think about it. But the analogy that I always give to the tour players, they're worried that bad habits are going to creep in. The analogy I use is, hey, let's say you've got your 56-degree wedge, and you're working on bunker shots, right? And let's say, I know it's becoming all the rage now to hit closed stance bunker shots, but let's say you've opened up, you got old school, right. The face is wide open, you're hitting 3 or 4 inches behind the ball, and you got this full swings, tons of wrist cock, everything. You're hitting these lovely bunker shots for an hour. And then your coach says, hey, let's go hit some, low check 30-yard spinners back in your stance with the same club. No one would say, well, I can't hit these. I'm trying to hit really close behind the ball, different stance, different. They'd be like, oh, these bunker. No one would ever think that practicing those bunker shots would have a negative influence on their ability to hit a low spinner. Yet I think a lot of the reasons why people believe that speed training has hurt their game is because they've got this self-belief that's already in there, and so the other thing that I want to bring that I'll try to bring to people's attention is that if you were to go out, I just use tour players, but we could use anybody. If you went out and surveyed the 700 members at your course in a particular month, June 1st, and you said, hey, how happy are you right now with your level of accuracy, your swing mechanics? Are you happy? Half of them would say, yeah, pretty happy. Things, they're on a hot streak. And then if you interviewed them 2 months later, half of those people that were happy with their swing mechanics would say, no, I've lost it, can't find it, I'm spraying it. That would be the case in the PGA Tour. So what happens is if you have this person speed training, they might start hitting the ball worse in 2 months. It has nothing to do with the speed training, right? It's just that's the way golf goes. But yet people are more likely to say, hey, what have I changed? Well, it's probably because I'm speed training. When you have to realize, no, that the base that you're comparing yourselves to isn't everybody always gets better and is always getting happier and happier with their swing mechanics and their swing. The reality is that probably at least half of those people in 2 months, that the control group that aren't doing anything, are going to be unhappy. So you have to compare the rate of unhappiness in swing mechanics to a true representative sample. And if I look at in this lab, we'd have folks hit driver 36 drives. We get their distance, their dispersion. They do stack training for 6 to 8 weeks, and then we'd measure it again. And the statistic I use is strokes gained off the tee.
Right.
Everybody improves their strokes gained off the tee. A lot of people increase their dispersion, but now the ball's on average 30 yards further down the fairway. But there are plenty of golfers who actually they gain yards and decrease their dispersion. So there's a overwhelmingly, from a group perspective, a positive effect on swing mechanics. It's very clear to me. And working with players like Matt Fitzpatrick, you can see his strokes gained has clearly gone up through stack training. And Eduardo Molinari tracks his statistics, and even though the ball's further down the fairway, his dispersions haven't increased. So there's lots of data that I would use to suggest that the overwhelming influence is positive, both from a distance and an accuracy standpoint.
Right. So with the stack system, of course, it's without a ball. You can't see the ball flight. What are some ways you can transfer as much of your speed from the stack system training to your actual driver swing on the course?
Yeah. So, and that's certainly an issue for probably, I'd say, 3 to 4% of our users will say, hey, my stack training speeds have gone up. A few will say that's not transferring to dry drivers, but most of the time they're when they swing their driver without a ball, that speed has also gone up. But then they're like, hey, put a ball in front of me, and my speed hasn't changed. And a great drill is to alternate. So go out in the range with some golf balls, tee up a ball, have your stack out with 195 grams loaded on it. That's the weight that's we consider equivalent to your driver, an adult male driver that's 45, and a half inches long approximately. So have the ball teed up, have the radar running. You take a swing with the 195. Hopefully it's the speed you've been swinging in training, nice and fast and loose and everything feels great. Right. Grab your driver. So, like take the 5 to 10 second break, not a rush, but right. There's not long breaks. Grab your driver. Hopefully that's much faster than what you've been playing with. And think of it like you're a bit young, but if you ever watch any clips of Davis Love or Bryson nowadays, they take really hard practice swings, right? So take that crazy hard practice swing, like a max effort driver swing, and then step up to the ball and try to emulate those same speed feels. Just let the ball get in the way. Don't be concerned if it's a toe hit or a heel hit. And you're going to notice, hey, that felt different. I wasn't quite as free flowing. That's fine. Back to the stack. So now you've got that kind of tight reserve feeling you have with your driver hitting a ball. And now you're going to try to shake it again. Grab the stack, make that air swing, grab your driver, make an air swing, step up to the ball, try again. Okay. Let this ball get in the way of the club face. Try to do that for 10 balls. So that's 30 total swings. And these should be near maximum effort attempts with the ball. So you're just trying to have the ball make contact with the face somewhere while swinging max effort. And then finish off the session with your speed you're comfortable with on the course. And you've got to kind of slowly break that down. And we've also got built into the app our speed priming sessions with balls. So you should regularly, replace a stack workout every few weeks with one of these sessions where you kind of warm up with the stack, take some air swing to the driver, and then the last set, you're actually hitting balls with your driver so you can track your driver speed throughout the program while you're hitting balls. That gets saved as a separate graph.
Yeah. So in my mind, I could be wrong, it would be natural for your on-course speed to be somewhat below your stack E speed. What is a reasonable area for that to be considered normal?
Yeah, it's a wide ranging percentage. And I'll use some golfers that we're familiar with. So Victor Hovland, who stacks, his on-course speed is almost identical to his E-speed. Wow. It's like a couple of mile per hour lower. When he steps onto the course, he is near maximal effort, probably somewhere like 98%.
Yeah.
But then you have a golfer like Tony Finau, who we've all seen those clips recently over the last year where he actually takes a really good rip at it, and he's like over 135. That's his max effort driver speed. But then he's playing low 120s, right? So for Hovland, his E speed's going to like almost match up. For Tony Finau, he's going to be playing, and his on-course driver speed's going to be like 15 miles per hour slower than his E speed. So it's really tough to give a range. But I would say you want it to be within 10%.
Okay.
And there are initially, it's really interesting, Carter. Initially, when people start speed training, their E speed will be less. The majority of golfers, their E speed is less than their on-course speed because they're just a little there's a little trepidation around making fast swings without the ball.
Interesting.
But that eventually goes away, and anybody that stacks for a while, I'm not sure where you're at, but for me, I'll hopefully be at my fastest again in about 2 months, and my E speed will be pretty close to 130. But I'm playing at 116, on the course. So yeah, right now I've just started speed training again for this upcoming season. And I just did a workout yesterday. My driver E speed was 121, and I hit some balls and I was 112. So it takes, even I'm limited in my ability to give a max effort swing at a ball comfortably. That's
Right.
something I need to work on. That's something that's helped me is, alternating dry swings with a golf ball.
Yeah. And it could be completely anecdotal with just the two golfers you decided to choose, but do you think it's a function of their size? Because I think Hovland's like 5'10", and of course Tony Finau is like 6'5", very different sizes of body. Do you think that plays a role?
Could be, but you maybe, but you look at Rory's probably close to his max. He's Fitzpatrick. Or sorry, I said Rory's maybe not super close to his max. I think that if he really went at it, he'd be kind of up where Tony Finau is.
Okay.
It's a good question. I don't know, like maybe. I don't know for sure. My gut
Yeah.
says maybe not so much. Good question though.
Yeah. I was just curious because someone like me, I'm 5'11", so I'm playing with some people who are 6'3", 6'4", and naturally they just seem to swing faster because they have more body mass. And so how do people like myself, being a little bit smaller than some other people, retain a competitive advantage with speed?
Yeah, well, that's a yeah, yeah. I don't know. Historically, certainly size gives you somewhat of an advantage, but there's always there's enough folks like a Rory, or Cameron Champ's not a
Yeah.
gigantic dude. Wilco, I'm going to pronounce his name wrong. Nine bar.
Yeah.
He's very wiry. He's crazy fast. Even someone like at the extreme ends, like Jamie Sadlowski.
Yeah.
He's not a massive person. So it's enough fuzz in the data where I wouldn't worry too much if you're 5'8" or 5'9". You can probably still get that thing moving pretty fast. My guess is with Tony Finau, is it's probably a little bit of scar tissue when he was playing web.com days, maybe swinging really fast and spraying it. Now he's got better mechanics. My gut tells me that he's probably not optimizing for stroke gained off the tee. I think like he should be probably. I would like to see him closer to 190 ball speed than he is right now, but he's got a very smart coach, and I'm sure they're checking that out. I would love to see the data. That it's not that challenging to do. You can. I'm sure you could go out and find a hole on a course and bang a whole bunch of number one titleists and bang a whole bunch of number two titleists with two very different effort levels. Could even alternate them and then just actually go do like a manual strokes gained or figure out what the dispersions are. He's a ping player, and the analytical folks at Ping, Eric Henriksen and Chris Brody, could easily take his distributions of those two driver speeds, overlay them over dozens of holes, do a simulation, and give a pretty good idea whether he's optimized for strokes gained or not. My gut says he's not. He could probably swing a little bit faster, but he's won a lot the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's true. So I haven't reached this point yet because I'm still pretty new to the stack system, but plateaus, I think, are something everybody hits eventually. What are some things people can do to work past those?
Well, for an elite golfer, I wouldn't even be so concerned about thinking about working past the plateau. It's a good question, and maybe I'll touch at it, but it's more about just realizing that even you record your speeds in the app and it's staring at you in the face. You can see that 110 with the 195, and it might go down to 109, 108, 109, 108, 107 over consecutive sessions, and it's easy to look at and go, my speed's getting slower. But really you need to think of it as those are training speeds. I'm from a track and field background, and a sprinter in a particular cycle, especially if they're 4 years out from Olympics, because they've got high volume of training, they're doing a lot of stuff, they're still improving underneath, but they're testing, their training speeds might be slower, right?
Yeah.
And it's not until you go, okay, I start to taper, I start to take longer breaks, start to get more sleep, whatever it is, and then boom, you kind of things change a little bit and you start to see a few upticks in speed. But it's a long process, like if you, what's your club at speed right now, Carter?
Right now, I probably on the course average 111, and
Okay.
my e-speed's like 122.
And you're 16,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Yes.
So let's say, these programs in the stack are like 6 weeks long, and
Mhm.
some of them are 8 to 10 weeks. Well, you're 16. Imagine you gain 1 mile per hour every 4 months. Okay.
Right.
That's going to look like mind-numbingly slow. You're going to feel like
Right.
you're in crazy plateaus. Like you're going to go through multiple programs without even nudging up a mile per hour. But 1 mile per hour every 3 months, that's 4 miles per hour a year,
Yep.
right? So by the time you're 20, that's 20 miles an hour. You're swinging at 131. So that
Right.
that right when you're like you get to your third year in college, you're an absolute beast.
Right.
And if you go back now, that's a glacial pace.
Of course.
But my point is that it like what would look like an extreme plateau, you know,
Hmm.
3 or 4 miles per hour a year, you could go a month or two without even of training and not really seeing that click over. So it's you things you want to check if you're plateauing or if your speed's dropping. Have you changed when you work out? When you stack.
Hmm.
And this is so luckily we have so few people that don't get faster. I can
Right.
kind of deal with them on a one-on-one basis. And so I figured out where the pitfalls are, folks that should be getting faster and aren't. I'm not talking about someone who's, oh, I've only gained 6 miles per hour in the foundation. I should have gained 10. I don't see
Yeah.
those folks too often. And who knows, if they could have gained 10, maybe they could have, but the other cases stick out. And usually it's something like, well, now I do my stack training in the morning, first thing. I used to be like mid-afternoon after my coffee. Okay. And it's, 90 degrees outside and I'm all warmed up versus first thing in the morning when, in Phoenix or wherever you are and there's
Right.
frost and you're cold and your body's not ready to move. You start doing like I've had folks like, oh, I started doing CrossFit. So now I do stack training Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I do CrossFit Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and they're just exhausted. Or they're not getting enough sleep.
Mm.
There's so many things that your speed can be sensitive to, and or you'll see people that have gone every second day. So the app provides a time window when it recommends you to work out. So if you train on
Hmm.
Monday, the app is going to say, hey, try to get in a workout Wednesday or Thursday. Well, if you've been going every 2 days, then it's probably not a bad idea to start spacing that out to every 3, maybe even every 4 days for a while to, allow yourself to recover a little bit.
Yeah.
So, those are the things that if you are in a true kind of slump where you should be increasing, you're not, those are things you can consider doing. The number one reason why folks don't increase, and it's about 0.5% of the folks gain less than 3 miles per hour in the foundation. So, one out of every 200 people.
Right.
But the number one reason why that person doesn't is because they don't understand maximum effort.
Mm.
So the first phase of the foundation, there's no maximum effort swings. It's just swing as hard as you would in a course. You're getting used to the changing weights. We don't want anybody to hurt themselves. This is a long-term gain. It's not about how fast can you get in 2 weeks, right? So we
Right.
ease people in, and then I'll check in on people, around session 7 or 8, and they're not getting any faster, and their speeds are just kind of constant. It's because they're continuing to swing it exactly like it's a tight 350-yard par 4, you know.
Yeah.
And then there's no stimulus. It goes back to the analogy of if I get the Olympic sprinter and have them run at 95% all the time, they're not getting any faster. So
Right.
so you have to push yourself a little bit. The second reason is lack of warm up. So the sessions are intended to be short and intense,
Hmm.
and you need to be really warmed up. So 15-minute stack session, I'm going to take me 20 to 25 minutes to warm up. So you
Okay.
need to be sweating. That first rep you need to be able to do maximum effort. And we've got a little thing in our FAQ that we're going to actually add into the app. It's called certifying your warm up. And folks that use Amiivo now can actually access it, where we look at how fast you were swinging the standard stack weight in previous sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to get within a few miles per hour that a couple of swings in a row before it's like, hey, yeah, okay,
Okay.
you're warm enough, ready to go,
Yeah.
right? So if you don't warm up, if you need 20 minutes, you only take 10, you're going to be halfway through your workout before you're getting the true benefit of it. And so it's really like, yeah, I don't expect you to get faster, and probably you're also going to increase your likelihood of injury.
Right. So, what are some things that you see commonly in people's mechanics that put a limit on their speed, or things people can do that would mechanically that would increase their speed?
The biggest one, and this would be, kind of like third or fourth down the list, is some people have mechanics that are so limiting that it
Mm-hmm.
makes it tough to add speed, and casting, lack of lag. I know
Yeah.
some people like to twist that into a dirty word, but the reality is that it's pretty darn important. Is the big limiting factor. So if I look at the video, I want to see, let's say you're a person that lifts the lead heel, and you probably should do that a little bit with the stack. I want to see that lead heel plant in the video before your club head finishes making the backswing. If I see that, and ideally, let's say you don't even lift your lead heel, I want to see the lower body, the pelvis and the thighs start to move in the downswing direction, and then I look up, and hopefully that club head hasn't moved yet. Ideally, it's still going in the backswing direction, but the number one mechanical thing I see is that, whoop, there goes the club head, and
Yeah.
then the rest of the body starts to move with it. And so that's in a general issue of how golfers are sequencing in transition. But that's the biggest one. That if you do that, it makes it really tough to take advantage of the training to add speed. And that, what a great thing to think about while you're stacking, improving that transition sequence. So a lot of times, making a faster backswing can help some people, but the vast majority of people actually need to be a little bit more like Cameron Young initially, or Hideki Matsuyama, where there's no rush to start down. You get up, you make sure that the club head, is coming to a stop, lower body, upper body, arms, and then the club head in that sequence from the top down. And we've got some other cues. You can go into the app, and if you swipe from the main four tiles that you see when the screen loads up, you swipe right to left a couple of times, you get your PBs with all the weights.
Mm-hmm.
And if you tap, there's a little toggle button. You can go from speed to percentile, and it shows you
Okay.
for your age and gender, where you fit with each of those weights that you're swinging. Right? Am
Okay.
I in the 95th percentile? That's really fast. Am I in the 40th percentile? That's really slow. And in general, folks that have high percentiles for heavier weights and low percentiles for lighter weights are not doing a good job getting the speed out to the club. So they're probably casting from the top. Everything's, kind of got like a flat backswing. Everything's kind of moving as one unit. There's no stretching in transition. Folks that have high percentiles with lighter weights,
Mm-hmm.
lower percentiles to heavy weights, aren't getting enough, what I would say, angular momentum into the system. They're not doing a great job of getting speed into the system from the ground. They're not using the ground very well. Maybe they're hanging back, staying on their trail foot.
Yeah.
Is one example. Maybe they don't have very much vertical force under the lead foot in transition. They're not twisting their feet on the ground to create some torque. They're not getting enough angular momentum into the system at all, but they're maybe good at getting what speed is in there out to the club.
I want to talk a little bit. You mentioned it a little bit with tempo and the kinematic sequence and stuff. And something, of course, I'm just being me, is very anecdotal, but something I've found very helpful recently is kind of focusing on making a smoother tempo, not necessarily slower, but smoother. What are kind of the mechanics behind that, and would that be helpful for a lot of people? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think um, you know tempo has a very specific definition, or it should, that gets kind of conflated with a lot of other things. Ratio of downswing time to backswing time.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, like, let's say your backswing's like 0.8 seconds, and your downswing time, let's say 0.9, and your downswing time is 0.3. So you've got this nice tempo. Well, if all of a sudden you were like a Sunjay M or a Colin Morikawa, and you took an extra half second to pull it over the first 3 feet, well, now your tempo is crazy. It's no longer that 3-1. It's some wild number, but really, you haven't really changed that much. The last, from a distance perspective, the last 90% of your backswing is still the same. You're still in the positions with similar speeds. Everything's the same. Yeah. But, there is certainly something to rhythm, when you decide to turn on certain muscles and turn off other muscles, and that can give us this aesthetically pleasing look as well, because it looks effortless. You see stretches at the right time. You see things transitioning in the right order. And we glump that together and say, oh, lovely rhythm and timing, lovely rhythm and tempo. Probably just rhythm. We can forget about the tempo because we're not even really measuring it,
Okay.
And, I wouldn't say, you wouldn't look at Sunjay M and say, oh, that's, or Morikawa or Matsuyama or Cameron Young. You wouldn't say, oh, their tempo's terrible. It's like, no, at least from my perspective, it looks pretty good.
Right.
Yet from a number perspective, it's not. You just say they have nice rhythm. They're sequencing things correctly. So, like things like the rope drill, I know lots of good instructors use that. Rob Holding's a big fan of it. Dr. Kwan uses it a lot. And I think that can be very helpful to get a sense of when you should be turning muscles on and off to move segments. And it allows you to kind of relieve a bit of the tension. You get muscles co-contracting. Muscles that are trying to move you in the backswing direction are still contracting when you're trying to go in the downswing direction. I don't think that's particularly good. So that will feel very non-rhythmical. So I think that if you are coordinating your segments in a way that leads to high club head speed with not with a low amount of muscular effort or feeling, it's probably a rhythmical swing. It's going to look like it's got some rhythm and feeling to it. Swings that have high speed and feel effortless are going to be associated with having good rhythm. And I think that's always a good thing to have in a golf swing. If you can get a reasonably high level of club head speed with less effort, it's probably going to be a more repeatable movement as well.
Okay. So, of course, one thing everybody is kind of searching for is consistency. What in mechanics do you see in consistent players that separate them from not consistent players?
Well, if you look at the human movement literature out there in science, I'm constantly looking for a study that says, regardless of the skill or sport, or doesn't even have to be in sport, could be in workplace and ergonomic scenario where you're like, hey, we want to produce this outcome, me touching this key on my keyboard. What set of joint movements or motions will make that end result more repeatable? There's nothing really out there, for any skill that says this is the most repeatable way to do it. So that's not particularly encouraging if you're trying to figure out the most repeatable way to move a golf club. Now, there is some stuff in engineering, and I mention it every now and again. There's this thing called the baby boot phenomenon, and it has to do with, the idea is if you have a shoe with a shoelace, and this gets into like some chaos stuff with physics, and you release this shoe from a particular position and it, kind of swings down, it's going to rotate and twist around the shoelace.
Right.
And there's different initial conditions that you can kind of rotate this boot, this baby's boot, and how far you pull it back. And if you rotate it twist it 1 degree, then it's 1 degree open at the bottom. You close it 2 degrees, it's 2 degrees closed on. But then you can find these initial starting conditions that lead to complete chaos. So changing things by a few degrees up top lead to no ability to predict what's going to happen at the bottom. So there could
Interesting.
be some of that stuff going on. I did some modeling. We probably don't have time to get into it now, where I looked at modeling golfers who had impact conditions similar to John Rahm with a lot of
Hmm.
shaft lean. I'm using John Rahm because he's an extreme example. He even kind of has a
Right.
lot of lean with the driver, versus a high handicapper who flips.
Hmm.
So you could create two swings. Even the high handicapper that flips, if they've got a decent club head speed, if you made Pingman that flipped, you can still create conditions that allows that ball to fly very well and be a PGA Tour quality ball flight.
Right.
The same as John Rahm. But that high handicapper that flips probably isn't going to be able to do that, over and over again. If you had them at 100 shots, there'd be bigger dispersion. So when I model this, and then I can go in and slightly tweak the timings of the muscles. So it's like you got this good swing, both swings look awesome, and then you can go in and say, right, well, what if this muscle contracted 0.00 seconds sooner or had a little bit more force? And you introduce these perturbations to both the John Rahm style swing and the flip swing, and the John Rahm swing produces more consistent trajectories of ball flight. And I haven't taken the time to go in and actually look at the models to tease out exactly why, but I should probably do that. So there might be something there in terms of repeatability. If this isn't probably a whole other podcast in itself, but one thing that stands out to me with tour players is the ability to get the center of mass
Hmm.
below the force vector the golfer is applying to the club. So that's a common trait, and that's getting into mechanics that a level of detail we probably don't have time for in this podcast. But that is something that's not really correlated to club head speed, but is a common trait amongst pretty much all tour players. And if there's if there
Interesting.
are tour players that are struggling, there's certainly evidence to suggest that they've now no longer have this relationship in terms of where the center mass of the club is relative to the kinetics that they're applying to the handle. So I mean, there's a couple of those things are not really solidly tested theories, in terms of a controlled experiment where you're like, hey, and they're tough to do. Consistency experiments are tough to do where you have a group of golfers and they've got, a certain type of swing, and then you have them improve just one aspect of it. And you can say, look, we did this, they improved it, and now their dispersions are tighter. That's a very tough study to do. You then need to have a whole other group of golfers in a control group where they believe they're getting really good instruction, they're improving something. Did this group get better because they are now making this new movement, or because they just practiced a lot, or just a placebo effect because they're now interacting with an instructor?
Right.
There's so much variability in golf anyway. It's a very daunting. Did they even? You may have taught them, for 4 weeks to improve this mechanics, but really, did they improve it?
Yeah.
So there's so many layers that make that study challenging to do. I certainly think that there are things you can do with how the club interacts with the ground. So I think there's an advantage, like go back to the John Rahm stuff, with having a bit of shaft lean
Hmm.
coming down, so that you've got, from a probability standpoint, the club is less likely to enter the ground behind the ball.
Okay.
You know what I mean? You can create mechanics that make it more likely to have a clean strike. Something that if you're hitting off a tee, it might not be an issue, but when you have that ball sitting on the ground, there's certain mechanics that make it give you a higher probability of making good contact. Adam Young has some good stuff on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, are there any common kind of misconceptions in the golf instructor or golf mechanics world that a lot of people say, influence, let's say, the club face or club path that really don't? I'll give you an example. So, I've seen a lot of coaches and I've talked to a lot of coaches who really talk about the importance of having the club face closed down, shaft parallel to the ball in the downswing. And basically all you have to do is rotate through, and that creates a more consistent club face versus someone who has it, straight up and down or somewhere in between. Does that actually make a big difference?
Well, from the data that we can see, Ping's got a lot of data. It's not a big difference. If anything, it's
Okay.
probably in the neighborhood of predicting 10% of a golfer's variability in um, dispersion or face to path variability, however you want to define it. About 10% of that at best might come from someone who's got like a crazy high, what I would call, you're kind of getting at, is crazy high rate of closure
Mm-hmm.
and a very low rate of closure. There are certainly really good golfers who are not closed down at impact, and they are,
Right.
at last shaft parallel. And I think Sam Snead was very well known for being quite wide open. He did okay.
Yeah.
And it's even when you look at large data sets that Ping has collected, where you look at rate of closure and dispersion, just like you squint real hard, you can kind of see something there. But in my opinion, there are things that are going to have a much larger influence, probably how you practice. Your overall hand-eye coordination, stuff that maybe you can improve with practice, but um, you know there might be some golfers, if you're really struggling, I think it's easier to address systematic issues
Yeah.
than variability issues. If you're constantly leaving the face open, then I would say, yeah, maybe let's change your grip a little bit, strengthen your grip so that at that position you're talking about, halfway down or last shot parallel, the face is a little bit more closed.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. Um, but to think that it will lead to an improvement or a decrease in dispersion, improvement in accuracy, I don't think there's a whole lot of data that suggests that's the case.
Yeah. You mentioned practice. In your research, have you found a way that makes practice more effective when practicing for mechanics?
No, I think if you're practicing to try and improve your mechanics, I think it becomes so individualistic. I think that's where a good
Okay.
coach is important. Where, okay, let's say hopefully you've picked the right mechanical thing to change.
Right.
And changing mechanics for speed is certainly maybe a little bit easier to know what to change than consistency. Um, so you pick the right thing, then it's about trying to figure out how you need to communicate to the golfer what's going to elicit that change, what drill is going to get that across. And I spend a lot of time working with golfers, and I might go through 10 things.
Right.
Sometimes you get it right, and then the more you coach, the more experience you have. So you might be like, oh yeah, okay, this is a 16-year-old kid like Carter. He's got this background, this body makeup with these limitations. He's got this concept of the golf swing in his head. I bet you this tip or concept with him is going to see an improvement in this mechanics. And maybe it's
Yeah.
the exact same mechanical thing that a 45-year-old lady is struggling with, but the coach might use a completely different approach to getting that same change in mechanics.
Right.
So in terms of practice for changing mechanics, yeah, that is very situational, in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked about a lot of really good stuff. There's a question I like to ask every guest I have on the podcast, since my podcast is focused more on junior golfers and collegiate golfers. If you could give one tip to that group of people, what would that one tip be?
Track your stats.
Okay.
I probably have 30 to 40 conversations a year with golfers like you, and they have this preconceived notion of what they want to work on.
Mm-hmm.
And after looking at their stats, that's not what they should be working on. And then even to figure out, like, so, okay, get Mark Brody's Golf Metrics app, right? You track your stats. Everybody wants to work on their swing mechanics, and they spend way too much time maybe working on that, when it's like, hey, you're losing strokes around the green, you're losing strokes putting, you're gaining a stroke on the field with your approach. Why are you spending 90% of your practice time working on your mechanics? Worse, you're working on your mechanics in a way where you're just tinkering with your mechanics instead of like, hey, your mechanics are great, you need to practice better, do more drills to challenge yourself at the appropriate level, do things that make you more comfortable on the course, not trying to improve your mechanics. And I think that's for a lot of coaches out there, that's okay. Players come to me, well, let's go work on mechanics, because maybe they don't see the value in just having them. Maybe they don't feel like they're adding value if they have them keep their same mechanics and just go practice,
Right.
better, different combines, different shots, different ways to challenge themselves, and track the statistics in practice as well. Are you, what you're doing in practice, are you getting better at it? Is it translating to the course? Not spending enough time on the mental side of things. If you can execute in practice and you've done a good job simulating, what you need to do on the course, and it's not translating, then look at strategy, and because that's easy to look at as well, to see if you're maximizing your strategy. I know you had Scott Fawcett on, and he's got a lot of thoughts around that. If you're like, all right, strategy's pretty good, my practice sessions are off the charts, then you probably need to take a look at the mental side of things to see why aren't you executing on the course. But it all comes from stats. It all, you need to track, get the Golf Metrics app by Mark Brody, and know what you need to work on, and drill it down to say, okay, my practice rounds, these are my stats. I'm able to execute, or out with buddies in the tournament, went and filled my stats in, and all of a sudden I'm hitting 2 more balls OB off the tee. So my strokes gain driving is terrible in a tournament. Well, then you can figure out why that is. So stats is by far, they have to drive everything you do and how much effort you put into practice. Even, finally getting a few mini tour guys to put a little bit more effort into their putting. Stack's got the stack putting feature came about because of this, to have people, practice your putting. Well, how are you practicing your putting? And the putting feature that we built into the stack is, it's not about emulating how you practice on the course. This comes from Mark Brody's stuff as well. It's about practicing the putts that will lead to the biggest improvement in your putting performance. So you have tons of 3-footers on the course, 3 feet and in, not tons, but a high percentage of your putts. You should never practice a 3-footer and in, because it just doesn't separate out a good putter from a bad putter. Why are some people gaining strokes on the putting green and others aren't? It's not because of 3 feet and in. It's not because of outside 30 feet.
Interesting.
So Mark does a great job showing that 4 feet to 7 feet, that's super important. Next important is like 8 feet, and then it gets less important. So with the Stack Putting app, free for all Stack users, we have a high percentage of putts in the appropriate ranges, and you can track in your practice session without really being conscious of it exactly why you're missing putts. So even to say, okay, I suck at putting, but are you practicing the right way?
Interesting. Yeah. So we've talked a lot about Stack and all the different stuff surrounding that today. Where can people find out more about you and more about the Stack?
They have to come visit me in Nova Scotia. No, just kidding. No one should come visit me in Nova Scotia. Twitter and thestacksystem.com. We've got our FAQ page on thestacksystem.com is full of, you could probably spend a full day going through watching all the videos, so that's kind of where I need to do a better job of getting my content out there. But that's a great place to see a lot of really high quality content, and click through all the links, and constantly filming new videos and putting them up there. Vimeo is a good source, and just even Twitter. I post a lot of stuff on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter at Sasho MacKenzie. And I don't know, maybe I've got 50 or 60 podcasts I've done, maybe not as good as the one with you, Carter, but they're out there. So, I'm all over Google my name, and with a specific golf topic. I talk a lot about putting, speed, a lot of different things.
Perfect. Well, thank you for taking the time to join me today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Perfect Par podcast. You can find out more about my guest in this episode and where you can find them in the episode description. You can also find out more about me and shorter podcast clips on my Instagram at carter.stroup or my Twitter at carterstroup.